Hello, hello, folks. Yet another unplanned video, but this one's a bit happier. Last night, I was watching the latest video from the Unlucky Tug. This is a Thomas and Friends themed video, and he was discussing the different logics behind why which characters have faces and why these do, these don't, and coming to the realization that basically everything that has a motor or engine that has purpose is alive, even if it doesn't have a face. That no trains, vehicles off the island of Sodor have a face, and only a chunk of the ones on Sodor have it. There wasn't a full explanation, but he had a good rule of thumb for who gets a face, who doesn't, that sort of thing. But I was listening to this video, and he's going through Edward and the other locomotives, of course, that have faces, and it got me thinking about something that I found out just a few weeks ago. When you grow up with the original Awdry books, like I did, and the model series, and I will say I've not read any of the books by his son Christopher Awdry. When I look online, there's folks trying to get like $100 a book. It's insane. And I'm just trying to find. Supposedly, there's a compilation of all his books. I just can't find it. No one's done another printing of them that I can find, which is quite surprising. So I only know of Christopher Awdry's books through the Unlucky Tug and Rexel Jet when he does his illustrations on YouTube, for instance. If they don't cover it by describing it, by showing images, I don't know. But anyway, growing up with the model series in the Reverend Awdry's books, he never once mentions that Edward was Gordon's direct predecessor. That Edward was the original express engine on the island until Gordon came about. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I'm understanding this. You look at Edward being the K class with his roughly 6 foot tall drivers, at least per his real life basis. Not the model series version where they're very tiny. I mean, they're trying not to bump up the running boards at all if they can avoid it. It appears. Same thing in CGI. They just went model series, boom into CGI for consistency, and to have one thing they tick the fans off with too badly, right? Fine. But if you look at Edward's basis, the 6 foot drivers, and the general rule of thumb of approximately 1 mile an hour of speed per inch in driver diameter, well, 6 feet is 72 inches, and the K class locomotives could do, was right about, I think it's up to 80, but like in service it was close to around 70 was in service. Just let that sink in for a moment. Edward doing about 70 miles an hour. Gordon can do 100 or just shy of. Think of the times he's raced. At least he wanted to race the Flying Scotsman. He raced the Spencer. I believe the model series ones, just fan fiction, if you will, on YouTube, and then CGI. They rehashed the rivalry that they already settled, and they settle it and they rehash it. The kind of like they reset Thomas being an infant and his stupidity, his cockiness, etc. Because if a character learns their lesson, you might as well throw the character away, and you can't throw Thomas away. You can't throw away the main characters like that. So, another topic. What I want to know is how come in all of the Rui series books and the Mall series, and as far as I'm aware, I have not watched CGI seasons. I have to, just bear and grin and get through it, right? But as far as I'm aware, is never ever brought up that Edward could ever at one point even go fast, let alone that he was the express locomotive for Sodor. Think of all the times, especially the first handful of seasons, where other engines, particularly Gordon and James, make fun of Edward, even up to the episode of Old Scrap Iron, I believe was the title, where Edward he's referred to as clanking old scrap iron. He made just to huff and puff and just basically scream his way into catching James. And another note about the episode is he did such a good job. So Tottenham Hat was so happy with how Edward saved the day that Edward finally got that maintenance he'd been needing for many, many years and just never got. Our benevolent leader, Sir Topham Hatt, finally went, yeah, you are way overdue for going off, I guess, to crew for a rebuild. But there are different levels of rebuild, right? You could do, like with automobile, you could do frame on or frame off. Or like with the engine block, you got to take the engine out, or you can rebuild it while it's under the hood. Taking it out, stripping it down, all the drilling, all the porting of the cylinders, etc. That's a full rebuild. If you leave the engine under the hood and you're scraping off the old gaskets, replacing them, spark plugs, and all that, you're doing whatever they call a mid-level rebuild, a light rebuild, partial, whatever your phrasing for that is. When Edward in Old Scrap Iron, he catches James and goes off for actually don't call it a rebuild. He said Strong Hat says that he's going to be sent off to have his warm parts mended, not even replaced, mended. What, duct tape special? What if, and this is something for the CGI series, if they bring it back, they're doing something. It looks like they're bringing back the CGI series. We'll see if Brenner comes back and they actually kind of let him do his job instead of meddling and doing a Bubba fiasco. I would like an episode where they do flashbacks, if you will. They've done this before, and it has been interesting. The scenes I have seen on YouTube, folks commenting, doing reviews, that's one area where the CGI actually did a decent job, where they would recreate model series stories, but try to make it more accurate to the book, or add details the Awdry had mentioned in interviews and or his additional writings to try to actually make those stories more accurate, more fulfilling, if you will. So I'll give them points on those. Give me an episode about Edward, a full Edward-centric video. Stop this modern era. Edward is evicted from Tidna's sheds to make way for that African character. I forget her name. It's nothing. I'm terrible with names. They brought Emily in during the model series. That's fine. Emily earned her spot. The other one did not. Throw your hate if you want. But give me an Edward-centric episode showing his arrival on the island of Sodor, a whole flashback, how he was the express engine, and then Gordon comes in and takes over, and Edward is demoted along with his late 1800s coaching stock, right, to make way for the longer, at that time, modern express coaches that Gordon pulls, that we continue to see him pull to this day. We know some of those coaches, at least the same model of them, are still around. They're demoted to branch line and secondary service, but they're still around. So let's have Edward finally get a full rebuild where he feels like 97% new. You can't go 100%, obviously, but make him feel almost as youthful as the day he was built, but with all the modern wisdom. It's almost a sci-fi premise, right? A very old, wealthy man does a body swap into a younger person's body. So they have all their experience, all the money, yada, yada, because they want to do a transfer of funds and ownership of properties, right? But now they've got all these decades of youth with their experience. So it's kind of like that without having all those quandaries, all the ethical issues, right? It's just Edward gets a full frame off rebuild, right? His wheels are trued, new flues, etc., and he feels like a new engine. Give him more than Henry received when Henry got his new shape. And then I would say if you're going to keep where we're on with the fourth Sir Topham hat, it's not all the same hat. It's the hat family, right? It's like kind of like a Baron situation, and being controller is a title that's handed down through the family tree. If you follow where this is like kind of more like almost modern day, those coaches that were demoted on branch line secondary service, they may no longer be on a Northwestern. They might actually be owned, let's say, by a mainland, where Soder's in place the Isle of Man. So they're in the UK proper on one of the heritage railways, and there's some deal where as a group, and they go, we would like to charter a special weekend excursion with Edward, and we have a handful of his original coaches. They're the same type or the actual coaches, and you can do a whole thing where Edward remembers their names, etc., etc. If you want to go that far, but where those coaches are brought over to down to Sodor, maybe Gordon picks them up or Edward does, someone else drops them off. But where those coaches have been lovingly restored, and they have been restored and rebuilt to mainline express standards. So similar to what I'm proposing with Edward, where they can go that 70, 50 miles an hour that they once did, versus the dawdling along, demoted, because still being maintained, but not to the higher standards they once were. However, they are now mainline, 70 miles an hour or so certified. And it's either have it where Edward knows this is happening and he's really like he's nervous about it, or it's a surprise. But either way, have it where Edward is nervous because he hasn't been fully rebuilt to the best of our recollections ever. At best, he's just been mended and mended and mended. He's a little branch line engine. Who cares about him, right? Everyone loves him, but no one ever actually wants to put money into the old soul. And when you think about how much the other engines on the island of Sodor screw up, Edward's on a very short list, which includes Toby and Stepney, of locomotives you could trust to babysit down for a day or two while you, presumably some hat or some sort of supervisor, goes to the beach with his family just to chill out from all the wrecks, right? Doesn't Edward deserve a proper rebuild to feel refreshed and not be clanking and aching all the time and be stiff? Does he deserve to get up to speed and not be out of breath and fearing he's going to break on a side rod? I mean, he pulled it off once with that excursion. Remember that special trip in the heavy rain? But goodness, Edward deserves better. So you get those coaches rebuilt, you get Edward rebuilt. Maybe he thinks it's just he's due for the rebuild, and maybe he doesn't even realize he's getting the works done to him. He thinks it's a a mid-level rebuild or something, because he's never been through a full rebuild or a middle, right? The workers don't tell him anything. Just a rebuild. This is normal. Sorry it's been so long, but you deserve it, right? Good boy. He does that rebuild. They surprise him with the coaches, or they tell him like a week beforehand, and he is nervous as heck because he hasn't been up to speed. We don't think. Has Edward gone over like 25, 30 miles an hour, save for being pushed by troublesome trucks? Though he's got a knack for keeping control over the trucks, right? But he's been shoved a few times still. It's like everyone. Does he know what it feels like to have the wind go across your face at above 30 something miles an hour anymore? Because I don't think he's been express engine since like 1910. So even if you base this excursion, if you base this like 1969, 1970, the very end of British mainline steam, that's still about 60 years it's been since he is actually charged along the main line in charge of express coaches, actually pounding away, making some ballast fly into neighboring fields. So my proposal is with the story, have some preservation group. They have these cars restored. They charter it for him for the weekend, do some photo run bys. I guess on the first day, and just kind of ease into it. And then the second day, they put him on the express schedule or the original that he used to run. Because obviously, if Gordon's doing well, there's the game Wonders of Sodor, I think, has Gordon doing closer to what 68, 70 for the express schedule, but he's really beat the clock going towards 100. So for those of you who are a little more nerdy than I, have the details at your fingertips. Either you do the old express schedule that Edward once did, or if the average speed that Gordon does is really right around 70, 75, have him try to do Gordon's express schedule, but with the older, shorter, presumably lighter weight express coaches, right? It wouldn't be the same deal as Gordon. It'd be the ones that Edward used to pull that he's physically able to pull once again because of the rebuild, and have him fly from one end of Sodor to the other and return the next day. I think that would be a fun, simple episode, but where Edward can show everybody he I mean, technically, he lost it. He lost the ability to go fast, the endurance and physical speed, but that he once again has it, where he can remind Gordon of what he has apparently forgotten over the past 60 something, depending on where in the railway series you're starting from, right? For saying the 1960s because of the dieselization and the fear of scrap on the island of Sodor. Let's say it's been 60 years. Gordon has forgotten apparently that he took over for Edward. He, along with James and others, have mocked Edward, may not relentlessly, but there are times they are cruel to him, and then Gordon sort of turns around and respects him more quietly. I want Gordon to be somewhere where Edward flies by, Gordon is shocked for a moment, and then have him speak aloud and recall, like he's honestly as though it is a repressed memory due to his ego, where he remembers taking over for Edward back when Edward was still. I mean, he's been slowing down, obviously, right? He was already aging, having some problems there before Gordon took over. But remembering where Edward used to be compared to where he was right before the rebuild, and then getting to see Edward back in his prime, so to speak, due to this heavy rebuild, and going, holy smokes. Think of the things he could say, even though there's maybe not a soul, maybe there's just a bird or a frog. You could do that little trope again where there's no one else around to hear what the engine says, but have Gordon just to himself apologize for things that he's said and thought about Edward, where he has this newfound respect for the old reliable. And he could make a joke, like an offhand remark about how he hopes he looks that good in preservation when the time comes for him. Because at some point, I know with the last book that Christopher Awdry wrote, unless he goes and decides to write more, which doesn't seem like he is, I know you have the HST pair of diesels from like the 1970s, 80s, where they finally retire Gordon and these diesels take over, and Gordon actually bows out respectfully. He hands over the reins, so to speak, to them, and as though they're like a worthy successor. And Gordon is kept around for special trips, right? They keep him in good paint and repair. He's still chartered or put on these trips and enjoys retirement, right? But this episode with Edward blasting by Gordon would be before that point. And you can also think of the other engines that have thought unkindly and acted unkindly towards Edward in the past. Same thing. Edward's going by them. He's making his stops, and he goes from having all these heavy self doubts he could ever do this again to owning the day, of reminiscing, being back those 60 years or so prior, and just thoroughly enjoying himself. But you don't have it where he wants to take the job back. He knows he has been succeeded. He's been replaced by Gordon, and he doesn't have any ill will against Gordon or the prior Fat Controller that made that decision, right? Because it's again like 3, 4 generations of the Hat family. He enjoys the moment. He wants to do it again, but he also realizes, hey, I am old, and you could relate that heavy rebuild to intensive like open heart surgery or something, right? You could make a big deal and say, yes, I as an Edward speaking, yes, I'm grateful for the rebuild, for the opportunity to pull the express again for a few days, for feeling this fantastic again. But I don't know if I want to go through another rebuild like that anytime too soon, because it was painful. It took a lot out of me, etc. But I'll be ready for when another group wants a trip back in time, right? When another rail fan, an enthusiast group, if you want to use more European phrasing, when they call, I'll be there to answer. You bring me my old coaches back, and we will have a banger of a trip. We'll show them how it used to be. And I think that would be fun because, again, they have forgotten about Edward. They kicked him out of the shed, out to pasture, essentially. You barely get a cameo. And there's a lot of love for the old boy. So if you have any ideas on how this uh, prospective Edward episode should go, anything should be stated, any scenes in particular, go ahead, add in the comments section like you would anywhere else. And maybe I'll do a follow-up video. Maybe I'll do some storyboarding. But remember to have fun with it. Don't go to war in the comments with each other. If you're watching this, either you stumbled upon it or you are a fan of Thomas and Friends, i.e. the Railway series, remember what it means to all of us and be kind about it. Later.